This is the weekend edition of Fear and Greed, daily business news for people who make their own decisions. I'm Michael Thompson, and good morning, Sean Aylmer.
Good morning, Michael.
Sean, our weekend... Look at me, I'm actually limbering up as well.
You are. You've two of the last 3 weeks you've won, and you're feeling pretty good at the moment.
2 of the last 3 weeks I've won? I'm pretty sure that's not right. I'm pretty sure you have absolutely flogged me in the last couple of weeks.
I don't think so. Is that right?
It was a
I'll take that back.
It was a 3.5 to half a point drubbing 2 weeks ago,
week.
and then last week was about a 3-1, I think it was. So,
is that right?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Well, look, 2 of the last 4 weeks. Anyway, look, we're even Stevens. We are starting fresh.
Yeah. Look, one thing that is clear is that I am the underdog here, and it is a position that I.
Do you know what amazes me? How much interaction we get from listeners saying, go the underdog, go the underdog. What a load of codswallop. And I'm sorry for all the kiddies out there listening with their fathers being forced to put up with this. Don't back Michael, right? He's a try-hard. He's doing his best.
It is telling the people not to back the man of the people. I don't think you can do that, Sean.
People, you need a leader. You don't need one of your own. Ooh. There's a lot wrong with that. I take that back totally.
So this is obviously a competitive environment, and it started early because the weekend show is different to the weekday show. The weekday show is just about the news. The weekend show is about the two of us competing over the news, and it is about each nominating what we think is the biggest business story of the week, the most remarkable business story, a sleeper story, one that's not getting the attention that we feel that it deserves, and our favourite story. Obviously, we need a judge who has already made his presence felt so far this recording, chiming in.
He's been laughing a lot.
Yes, he has. And that judge is our Fear and Greed colleague, Adam Lang, who has delivered some very, very firm, decisive judgments against me over the last few weeks, and I do not hold that against him. Adam, good morning.
Good morning, Michael. Good morning, Sean.
Morning, Adam. Lovely to see you wearing one of those rock T-shirts that you love to fashion. Do you remember, Michael, about a year ago, he actually said, hey, I've got you both a rock T-shirt.
That's right, for Oz Music Day.
Yeah, and it's like, have you seen yours?
No, I haven't. No. I've seen Adam wearing 3 different shirts on occasion.
One a little too large.
Yes, well, today's T-shirt you might not recognise easily, but it's the Dr. Dan Triple M T-shirt. So very rock.
Oh, wow. That's a long time ago, Dr. Dan. Wow. How do you keep a T-shirt for 25 years?
Well, it helps when you have 400 of them.
Yeah. Can you imagine that? Yes, apart from that crop rotation, I've got a lot of them, but would you guess that I keep them reasonably well, neatly?
Do you remember that movie, something to do with grey?
50 Shades?
50 Shades of Grey, that's it. I don't know whether you remember it.
No, didn't see it, Sean, but do tell.
What I do remember is one of those scenes when she walks into Mr. Grey's bedroom. Mm-hmm. Be careful, kids. And she goes to his cupboard and everything is perfectly manicured. The suits are there, the white shirts are there, the jumpers are well folded, the T-shirts. I reckon that would be like...
Isn't that how everyone does it?
But the cupboard.
May I just interrupt just briefly to point out the fact that, Sean, you watched 50 Shades of Grey and the thing you took away from it was how neatly organised his wardrobe was?
It's a pretty ordinary movie, let's be honest.
Yeah, well, anyway. Look, we're here to do a show. We're here to talk about business news. Let's go. You go first, Sean, with the biggest business story of the week. What did you find?
Well, it's quite the week for the banks. National Australia Bank reported its result for the 6 months to the end of March. Pretty ordinary, really, except that its business bank is doing very, very well. Not that I need to tell you why this is a big story, Adam. It's self-apparent, but I'm going to tell you anyway. The banks are the biggest companies in Australia, apart from BHP and CSL. The 4 of the 6 top companies are the banks. Those BHP and CSL are very industry specific, of course. The banks can tell us what is really going on in the economy. Also, via our super funds, most of us own shares in the banks. They've been very strong performers. In fact, bank shares have been better performers than a bunch of other stocks this year. Think about Telstra, Woolies, Qantas, Woodside, Transurban, Coles, all major players. They've all underperformed. Anyway, the news from National Australia Bank is a bit average. While it announced a 13% drop in cash profit to $3.6 billion, mostly because of mortgage wars, also the previous period was very, very strong, Boss Andrew Irvine said there are still large sectors of the economy doing really well, and there's an overemphasis on the bad stuff, those that are struggling, and an underemphasis on parts of the economy that are doing well. The amount of business lending in the pipeline is a very positive sign for the economy. In fact, Mr. Irvine called it astonishing and proof that the economy is holding up pretty well. He said mining and minerals, agribusiness, healthcare, defence and some manufacturing, they're all doing well. Now, we'll find out more next week when Westpac and ANZ report. But what a great insight into what's going on in the economy, these big bank results. That's why I think this week the National Australia Bank result was a very big story.
I think it is a big story. And look, I actually don't think that this first category, I don't think I really want to compete on this one because that is a big business story. What I'm nominating is actually what I think would be the most important story of the week, Sean.
Yep.
Because it was a very big week in federal politics, but more specifically, it was a very important week for a massive social issue that we have in this country. National Cabinet met on Wednesday and agreed to a number of kind of key priorities around domestic violence, and that the states and federal government have agreed to, it's quite a list, have agreed to strengthen accountability and consequences for perpetrators of domestic violence. There's early intervention with high-risk perpetrators and serial offenders, strengthening prevention work through targeted evidence-based approaches. A focus will be maintained on missing and murdered First Nations women and children. New legislation banning deepfake pornography, cracking down on sharing sexually explicit material, using technology, things like artificial intelligence. And then the big kind of political element of this, the funding side of it, $925 million from the federal government over 5 years to permanently establish the Leaving Violence program. Now, that includes access to up to $5,000 in financial support for people leaving violence. It's a political response to a social issue, one that arguably I would say seems to be getting out of hand. The Prime Minister has described it as a national crisis. I think he's right. In 2022-23, 34 women were killed by a current or former partner, and it's broader than domestic or family violence. In that same period, men killed 60 women in this country. Just the first 4 months of this year, 26 women have allegedly been murdered by men. If that's not a national crisis, then I don't know what is. And it seems like the issue is at last getting the attention that it needs, but it certainly needs more than money. It needs more than policy. It needs every single man in this country to call out violence against women, to call out disrespect against women. I think we all have a part to play in this. And while it's obviously too late for too many women already this year, maybe the events of this week will be the start of the change that we need. I think it's a very big story. It is an absolutely vital, it's an important story. And I just think it is overdue that it is getting the attention that we have seen this week.
Yeah, that's breathtaking, isn't it? It's an issue that men have to own. It's beyond judgment, really. And so for me, definitely the biggest story of the week.
All right. Well, most remarkable category. Now, this is, I suppose, where we really do get competitive. And Sean, is it worth asking for the criteria on which Adam is judging?
Well, the thing is, if we get the criteria, the listener's going to think that it's irrelevant.
Well, no, it's nice to actually know what's being disregarded.
Yes.
Don't you think? Like, it's actually nice to know what is actually not relevant.
It allows us to complain more.
Yes, exactly. It gives our complaints context, really.
But only ever if you lose. So those critical criteria: 1, topicality; 2, timeliness; 3, economic impact; 4th one is subjective bias. We love a bit of that. And lastly, 5th is melodrama. Michael, one of your strong suits.
It is, actually. And not this week. I'm melodrama free. Shall I go first, Sean?
Yes, Michael, melodrama Thompson. Go for it.
Oh, well, actually, this story is not actually very melodramatic because the facts themselves are pretty extraordinary. I actually love it.
Do you ever think, Michael, that you do the melodrama because the facts aren't that good in your stories?
Absolutely. That is 100% why.
Okay.
It is what I bring to this show, Sean. It is the only thing I've got going for me is the melodramatic flair. Look, I love it when I get to legitimately do an airline story in a category without actually having to make up a reason for why it fits into that category. Not admitting, of course, that I've done that before. But there is a chance that in the past, my justifications for talking about aircraft or airlines or space may have just been a little bit flimsy, just a little bit tenuous. The link to the category. Not this week.
Whoa.
Because I said no melodrama, and I just kind of slipped straight back into character. Because the most remarkable story, certainly the one that had everyone talking this week, is the collapse of Bonza, Australia's newest and possibly our shortest-lived airline. Pretty amazing story, really. On Tuesday, services on Bonza were cancelled abruptly, with passengers left stranded at airports across the country. Aircraft were being repossessed, one of them even with passengers already on it. I'm assuming the passengers got to...
Yeah, were they repossessed as well?
They were. Yes, yeah. I suspect they're currently sitting in like a repossessed lot somewhere, waiting to be claimed by family members. And by the end of the day, that was Tuesday, aircraft being repossessed, kind of passengers going to at airports, not knowing what's going on. By the end of the day, Bonza was in voluntary administration. The problem? Well, actually, it should be the problems, because there are a few of them. The airline is targeting leisure travellers, ultra cheap fares as low as $50. There's not much fat in that. And when they didn't have the business travellers paying higher fares, well, it's very hard to pay the lease on new aircraft. But and big aircraft as well, arguably too big to be flying to a lot of these kind of regional destinations, where typically you'll have kind of smaller aircraft like your Dash 8s from say Rex or QantasLink kind of flying into those areas.
You loved saying Dash 8s, didn't you? You loved showing you a little bit of knowledge going into this story.
Little bit of knowledge. I'm passionate about aircraft. I love talking about this.
Keep going, Michael. Keep going.
And it gets a little bit complicated and a bit colourful, I think, when you look then at who owns Bonza. You have US investors, 777 Partners, which is fantastic, isn't it, for airline investors they also own a Canadian low-cost airline. They're trying to take over English football club Everton. Isn't that colourful? Kind of like it's not just the fact that they're investing in airlines. They're also trying to get involved in sport as well. It just adds that little bit of kind of international flair to it all. Where to from here, though? It is not, one would say, perhaps looking good for Bonza. Maybe that's a slight understatement. Flights are cancelled until at least next Wednesday. I think anyone who thinks that they'll be taking off on Thursday might be a little bit overly optimistic. It affects a lot of people. 183 flights with 33,000 passengers who are scheduled to fly with Bonza over the next week. Clearly, it's tough for a third airline in this country. Qantas, obviously, with QantasLink and with Jetstar, and then Virgin, have the market pretty well dominated. The last time we had another independent airline in Australia was Compass in the early 90s. That lasted 28 months. Bonza only made 16. I can't see anyone really rushing to try and beat that record anytime soon. I think this whole story is remarkable.
Remarkable. Good story. Good story. Not really remarkable, because if you listen to Neil Hansford in our interview last week, he'll say, I told you this right up front. Now, Neil's very outspoken and straight speaking, but he did come on and he goes, well, yeah, I said it had 5% chance. And I
was right. Yeah.
That's right.
Wasn't he great? He was fantastic.
He was very funny. But my point telling you that is that's not remarkable at all, Michael. What is remarkable, however, Optus and TPG have done $1 billion plus network sharing deal, which will broaden TPG's coverage to 98.4% of the Australian population. Wake up, Jeff. Sorry, Michael. What is remarkable about this is that it was their competition regulator who, after knocking back a tie-up between Telstra and TPG last year on competition concerns, told the smaller player, TPG, to go and do a deal with Optus so they could take on Telstra. Even more remarkable, they did. So the details, TPG will pay Optus $1.6 billion over 11 years for access to nearly 2,500 Optus mobile towers, effectively tripling its regional 4G and 5G coverage. TPG's 4G coverage will go from around 400,000 square kilometres to about 1 million square kilometres. Basically, it becomes a major competitor. Optus will pay TPG about $400 million to use some of its unused network spectrum. The two countries will maintain control over their own core networks. They'll continue to operate their own networks in metropolitan areas. Now, TPG operates brands like Vodafone, TPG, II, Net, Felix. Remember, if you've got one of those carriers, you're going to be much better off when you're in the bush next time. It means there are now 3 majors, for want of a better word, competing in the bush rather than 2. So we have the Telstra network and then the combined Optus TPG network, which is much more competitive than a Telstra TPG network versus Optus, because when you put TPG and Optus together, you get 98.4% of the country covered. Suddenly we have competition in the bush. That's fantastic and remarkable given how big Australia is. But the really remarkable thing is that the regulator told TPG to take on Telstra when they knocked back the merger discussions, and they did. Adam.
Cracking competition, this one. Two different industries with similar stories in that they are both dominated by a few players, airlines and telcos. And
Oh, yeah.
Ooh, like that. Duopolies.
yeah, exactly how that impact is playing out. So they're both really, really good and remarkable. Sean, what you gained on economic impact, Michael made up for in melodrama. So I can't split them. It's a dead heat on this one.
Oh, so half a point each.
Yes.
Economic impact versus melodrama. No, they're both as important as each other in a business podcast.
Always love feedback.
Well, maybe they should be, Sean, because in the end, without the melodrama, who's going to listen? The only person who would listen would be Adam.
But he's the judge. That's the whole point. I don't care who's listening. It's all about Adam.
Look, you know what? It's half a point each. And to the supporters of the underdog, to the people supporting the man of the people, I say hang in there. We are going to get this. We have this. We are going to come back after the break. I have got some stellar stories for the second half of this. And the melodrama, I am dialing it up to 11.
Hot.
Yeah. All right, let's take a break. We'll be back in a moment. All right, Sean, we're looking for a sleeper story. So a sleeper story is, of course, one that's maybe flying under the radar a little bit. Could I sound more Australian when I say radar? Flying under the radar.
Cobber digger, pal.
And also maybe not getting the attention that we feel it deserves. So this could be picking out something that's going to be a bigger story, maybe in a year's time or 2 years' time, or maybe in 5 years' time, or never. That's typically mine. Last week, God, didn't I have a shocker last week with my reverse sleeper story? Sean, you go first this week because I need some time to psych myself up.
Well, there were some very promising signs from the two big... You know what, I'm thrown here, right? Because just before the break, this sleeper story has enormous economic impact. But the fact that Adam reckons melodrama is as important...
Still hanging on to the last one.
Well, it's not even the last one. It's like, I think I'm going to have to change my whole approach to the weekend edition.
Yeah.
And I don't actually have Michael's ability when it comes to melodrama. And I'm owning that.
In fairness, very few people do.
No, but I'm owning it. I'm happy. I don't mind not having that ability. That's okay. But so I am a bit thrown, but, let's just economic impact. God, I sound boring. Anyway, there are some really promising signs from the two big supermarkets this week, Woolies and Coles, about inflation. Whoa, inflation. Reserve Bank meeting next week. Biggest economic impact in the world. Is that melodramatic? No, that's just stupid.
It just sounded sarcastic.
Yeah, it just sounded dumb. Look, I mean, people are really struggling. Households are struggling with the cost of living. And what those figures from Woolies and Coles show, higher interest rates are working. Coles released its third quarter sales. They jumped by 3%, about $10 billion for the quarter. People are spending more in supermarkets on necessities, less on stuff like beer and wine. The good news on the price front, shelf inflation fell to 2.2% during the March quarter. 2.2%, that's well and truly within the Reserve Bank target band for those particular goods. Over at Woolies, outgoing boss Brad Banducci said supermarkets are going to find the next 12 months tough as rising rents, energy and insurance bills and little prospect of rate relief eat into consumers' pay packets. Sales for the 3 months to the end of March grew 1.5%. Now, Mr. Banducci, who leaves the job later this year, said shoppers were coming in more frequently to buy stuff on sale, promotional stuff, but they're actually spending less each trip. Then we also had the ABS retail sales figures, pretty extraordinary really. In March, retail growth was the weakest on record year on year outside the COVID pandemic and the introduction of the GST. less than 1%. It was 0.8%. Sales fell in all industries except for food retailing, like clothing, footwear, personal accessories. They fell really sharply. This is telling us what's actually happening on the ground. Prices aren't rising as much as they were. Sure, they are in some services, but not in goods prices. It's basically the reason I don't think we've got any chance of interest rates rising again. And that's why it's a sleeper story. Lack of melodrama, economic impact, huge, Michael.
I'm not going to criticize. Absolutely not. No. It is a very important story.
It's like the word worthy, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah. I was trying to think of the right word to describe it that didn't criticize you or the story, because it is a worthy story, and worthy is the right word for it. It feels like, you know what? That was our vegetables. We have eaten our vegetables and now we get dessert.
But what helps you live? Like, what is it that helps you live and thrive and keep the weight off?
Don't fall into the trap, Sean.
No, I'm taking him on.
No, okay. Dessert is what helps you thrive, basically, because without dessert, seriously, life is dull. I mean, if you just go around eating carrots for every meal, God, you're going to be a dull human. You will be orange. You will see very well in the dark, but you're going to have a very boring, dull life. 2 to 3 desserts per night. That's the way to do it. You know who you don't trust? You don't trust those people who, when you go out for dinner with them and they order cheese for dessert, or even worse, no dessert at all.
What about entrees, though? Would you pick entree over dessert?
I'd probably pick both.
All right.
Obviously, I would actually look to see what the desserts are. Yes. And if there is nothing quite up to the standard that I'm hoping for, then maybe. And if I'm only going to do 2 courses, then I would go for an entree. But I mean, there is always room for dessert. I mean, it's the second dessert stomach. Everyone has one. It's a little known scientific fact, probably not anatomically correct.
No, it actually is. Remember, we did this story from ages ago, and it was cavemen. They reckon as evolution occurred, a caveman would kill an animal of some type and eat the meat, and they'd be totally full. And as they're walking back to their cave,
they'd spy a nice little panna cotta somewhere.
Yeah, that's it. There's a panna cotta. Let's pick it up. Now, they'd see berries or something like that, and even though they are so incredibly full, they'd still eat the berries. And they reckon evolution created effectively pouches in your stomach so that you would have goods, like in this case berries, that you needed to live. So what you said is actually true. It's why you're so full, and then the panna cotta comes out, the flummery, this sticky date pudding, creamed rice, any of those things, and you tuck into it even though you're really full.
Anyway, sleeper story. This is what we're here to do. I think I have found a winner this week. As I mentioned before, you will recall that last week I attempted the rare reverse sleeper.
Very rare.
Where a story happened but then didn't happen, but people thought that it still did, and therefore that made it a reverse sleeper. You'll recall that it was a total unmitigated disaster. I lost, but never let it be said that I don't take risks on this show.
By doing the same thing again.
No. Oh. This week I'm actually much more confident in my story being a sleeper, but it's still a risk because I don't actually understand the story. So I'm going to give it a crack. Here we go.
There'd be a lot of stories, though, you do that you don't understand, Michael. This isn't really a rarity.
You did line yourself up for that one.
Australia is making a major play to become a world leader in quantum computing. Now,
Michael, what is quantum computing?
Great question, Sean. It is computing, but better, right? So if you think a normal computer, but a better version of that. That's basically quantum computing as far as I can see. It's described as a rapidly emerging technology that harnesses all those laws of quantum mechanics. You know, those laws that we all know about.
Michael, tell me what they are. What are the laws of quantum mechanics?
I will get to them in a sec. Seriously, if I start doing that, I'll be going for 20 minutes because it's just that fascinating. And they use these laws, the quantum mechanics laws, to solve problems that are considered too complex for classical computers. Now, this is that is basically the definition according to IBM, that it's going to be critical in artificial intelligence and cybersecurity, medical research, all of these things. But
don't you love it, Adam? That last phrasing of Michael's, he went into serious mode.
Yeah.
Thus far, everything has been melodrama. And then he goes, it'll be critical in artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, and medical research. He went into serious mode. Get out of that, Michael. Go back to the melodrama.
Yeah.
But
He's back.
here we are, we're back. At this stage, the problem with quantum computing is that no one's been able to do it successfully because it's too unstable. One of the problems, right? And Sean, you talked about qubits and about the fact that it's essentially trying to get the bits to work at the same time. So anyway, look, one of the problems here is not being able to, and I quote, make the qubits vibrate in unison, which sounds like a very...
You are a child. You are a child.
A very erotic problem for quantum computing.
It really doesn't.
It does. Yeah, the little qubits vibrating in unison. Here we go.
Hello.
Anyway, the sleeper story here.
Hello, boys.
The sleeper story here is that Australia thinks it might be able to lead the way on this.
Now, that's the most remarkable part of the story, actually.
Because when you think about the companies that are pouring so much money into this, like IBM, as I mentioned before, and yet here we have the federal government investing $470 million and the Queensland government tipping in another $470 million into a company hoping to build the world's first quantum computer. The company PsiQuantum was set up by Australians, but it's US owned. It has its HQ in California. This investment's going to secure a local headquarters in Brisbane, which could become home to the world's first quantum computer. We have the potential to lead the world here, and nobody is talking about it. Everyone's just so fixated on all the quantum laws, and they're not talking about what it actually means for us here in Australia. What a triumph for Australia and for those vibrating qubits. What a sleeper story.
Brisbane will be full of vibrating qubits.
And everyone vibrating at the same time. That's the thing. They've got to do it in unison. Yeah, you can't. I mean, as soon as you get one qubit kind of vibrating out of whack with everyone else.
It's like a musical chorus.
Yeah.
It is. It is. I mean, a cacophony of qubits.
Yeah.
You know, one of those great expressions when people think about starting a business and go, oh, how hard can it be?
Oh, Fear and Greed 4 years ago. Adam walked in and goes, hey, how hard can it be? Let's just get a podcast up and running.
As it turns out, pretty hard. Quantum computing. I love that story. And Michael, I perhaps even more loved your explanation of quantum computing. Genius.
Like just like regular computers, but better.
Yeah, it's just wonderful. So you certainly maxed it on melodrama, but on this one, Sean's story has to win. It is an absolute ripper, the hope of inflation coming down and interest rates coming down. Oh, it's just so hopeful and optimistic. I loved it. Sean, you win.
You know what? I'm not surprised. I thought there were some possible flaws in my argument, a little bit of weakness. Depth of knowledge was probably lacking at some point in that story.
No.
Subject matter expertise.
So 1.5 to half.
Yes, Michael, that's right.
Ooh, okay, favourite story. Shall I go first?
Go for it, Michael. You're up.
No, Sean, I reckon you go first because I feel like I've talked for the last 10 minutes and I'm gonna take a little punt on this and say people are probably sick of me.
Oh,
I don't know about people. It's more Adam and I.
Go on.
Okay, I'll tell you my favourite story. I'm sort of betwixt and between here because I'm just going to go for a great story. In fact, Adam, just dump your arbitrary criteria and just think about what's a good old-fashioned yarn.
righto, done.
So this week, a gold pocket watch that was recovered from the body of the richest man on the Titanic sold for a record-breaking £1.175 million. Now, the watch was sold to a private collector in the US for the highest amount ever for Titanic memorabilia. The original owner of the watch, this is where it starts getting interesting, was a guy called John Jacob Astor. He was 47 when the Titanic went down in 1912. He saw his new wife, Madeline, onto a lifeboat. He asked whether he could go on as well. They said women and children only. He put Madeline on the lifeboat. She was 18 at the time and pregnant. Quite the scandal. He'd 47. He had been married before anyway. John JJA put Madeline onto the lifeboat, his then pregnant wife. Now, rather than try his luck with another safety vessel, Mr. Astor, who apparently was impeccably dressed, a prominent member of the wealthy Astor family, was last seen smoking a cigarette and chatting with a fellow passenger as the Titanic sank. His body was recovered from the Atlantic Ocean 7 days later, and his 14-carat gold Waltham pocket watch engraved JJA was found. But there's more. So Madeline, the 18-year-old wife, gave birth to Jakey 4 months later in the Manhattan Fifth Avenue mansion that John Astor had given to his new wife, not his former wife. A bit of a scandal there. Madeline then went on to marry a wealthy banker. She had 2 sons. Then she divorced him, married a wealthy Italian actor. They divorced 5 years later when Madeline died of a heart attack, aged 46. Now, I know you're going to ask what happened to all the Astor wealth. So John Astor actually gave it to his son, Vincent, not Jakey. So Vincent to his first wife. When Vincent died in 1959, it went to Vincent's wife, Brooke, who basically then spent the next 48 years giving it away. Although towards the end there, Brooke had a son, Tony, and he actually stole some of it. He went to jail for his actions. But the Astor wealth was actually dissipated by being given away over all that time. Don't you think that's just a fascinating story, Adam?
I do, actually. So I'm abandoning the normal criteria, and I'm just going with yarn.
Yeah,
Yes.
just a good yarn.
So, Michael, good luck.
Well, no.
Sudden change in criteria here.
No, I want the old criteria.
Oh, okay.
Because Adam, you know what I always say on this show? I say it all the time, every week. I say, if it's not about reform, then it's not my favourite story.
Normally you say, I'm a person of the people. I thought that's what
I say a lot of things all the time.
Yeah.
But I love reform. I love tax reform, all that kind of thing. And the fact, Adam, that you are an absolute reform enthusiast is entirely coincidental. In fact, I wasn't even aware of this fact when I chose this for my favourite story. But what we saw this week was meaningful reform of the rules around foreign investment.
No.
Designed to bring more money flowing into this country, the country where we live. It's part of the government's Future Made in Australia Act with
God, this is exciting. Go on.
With the Treasurer saying, what is not exciting about this, Sean? Come on. It's going to make Australia a more attractive place to invest. It'll boost economic prosperity and productivity. It'll strengthen Australia's ability to protect the national interest. There are safeguards here for the higher risk proposals. Think kind of Chinese companies wanting to buy critical infrastructure, critical minerals. But really, the core of this and the part that gets me really excited is that much of the reform involves streamlining the process for known entities in non-sensitive sectors and repeat customers. Think, Sean, how about this? Big Canadian pension funds.
Wow.
That kind of thing.
I haven't been this excited since qubits started vibrating in unison. Go on.
The kind of money that Australia needs flowing into perhaps our infrastructure in order to keep us moving, to keep us growing. This story is absolutely ripe with glorious reform. And I think I speak for myself and for the judge when I say that this is our favourite story of the week.
Ripe with glorious reform. Wonderful.
Melodrama free.
Well, no, maxing points for melodrama as usual, as expected. Difficult to score. 2 different mechanisms. Sean, magnificent yarn. Just hard to beat. And so you win.
Look at Michael's face. That is just beautiful.
Oh, you know what? I don't like the idea of a revolution. I don't want to be
a purge, a putsch.
I don't want to I I don't want to be a coup leader, but sometimes
However.
you just feel the need to do it, right?
Normally a coup takes 2 people, at least 2.
No, I'm not. It's not a coup within the show. It is my people that are going to rise up here. Because I tell you what, right, in cars across the country, right now, in homes,
Horns are tooting.
all over the place, there are cries of outrage. There are children inconsolable.
Saying to their dads, but that story was absolutely right with glorious reform,
Yes.
Dad.
The children are saying, reform, Dad. Why didn't it win?
And also at the sheer injustice of you changing the criteria for Sean and me having to stick with the old criteria because that was what I'd thought you were going to be judged.
It's a little novel, isn't it?
Yeah, I like it, Adam. Like it.
So 2.5 to half. Well, it's another drubbing.
Let's call it a draw.
Yeah, sounds better. Thank you very much, Sean.
Thanks, Michael.
And thank you, Adam.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Sean.
Make sure you're following the podcast and please join us online on LinkedIn, Instagram, X, TikTok and Facebook. I'm Michael Thompson and that was Fear and Greed. Have a great weekend.